Ebola.
Yes.
Okay, we were talking about this before the show, and we both read a couple articles on it. And the question, I guess, has to do with containment, right? And what is the best way for it to be contained? And there's arguments that you're hearing. I would say your sensationalist arguments on the right that you have, let's say Fox News or Glenn Beck or Michael Savage or Alex Jones. These would be your sensational people on the right. And I think on the left, I think there's almost a lackadaisical approach, almost like, well, we can take care of anything that comes our way. And it sounds almost as convincing as the high school valedictorian assuring everybody in the school that they could have all been there. Every one of you could be up here. We're all the same and stuff. And this kind of utopian idealism that you hear in high school graduation ceremonies is kind of echoed in what you hear about America's infrastructure, our ability to deal with this, our ability to contain possible outbreaks and the like, and premised upon more liberal Western values too, that our Western values are inclusive, that we aren't isolationists, and not just about military policy, but also foreign policy in general. And then my personal belief is that there has to be a middle. There has to be a golden mean. There has to be, between these two thieves, there has to be a savior, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that answer is. I don't. I know that I'm not convinced by the right or the left on this. I'm not too reassured by President Barack Obama. I watched his White House address talking about Ebola, and I wasn't too reassured by that. But I don't have the answer for it. I want your thoughts on this. Yeah.
Well, my thoughts are, if you have, and I'm not saying we have all the best physicians in the world and the best doctors, but we have quite a few of them. And if you have first world nations that are not responding to this Ebola outbreak at the source, which would be in third world nations like Sierra Leone and Liberia, are at risk of a backfire. It's blowback. They're at risk of a blowback, because what could happen is the disease would fester, and there's no clear, clean way of barricading a border for 350 million people from a disease. So it's like you said, there is a middle ground. The idea that we can close up every border is nonsense. It's not going to work. It doesn't work. And the president of the CDC, what is it? Tom Friedman.
Yeah.
Was it? I think. Let me check. This is from Frieden. Yeah. This is the insider for Fox News, and it says CDC Director Tom Frieden pushed back this morning against those who argue the United States should ban all flights from West Africa and not allow people into the country from places like Liberia. He had said in quotations here, "I wish we could get to zero risk by sealing off the border, but we can't. The only way we are going to get zero risk in this country is by controlling it in Africa. Until that happens, Americans may come back with Ebola. Other people who have the right to return or a visa to enter may come back. People go to third world countries and come from there. Sealing off, first off, won't work. Second off, it will backfire, because it can't get the help in there, and then we're not going to be able to stop the outbreak, and ultimately we will end up at higher risk, not lower risk."
See, I just don't. That's where I'm skeptical. I mean, why couldn't we still go in there? I mean, it's one thing to say shut something down coming in. It's a different thing saying going out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is there not some sensibility to the statement to say the United States, if we look at places like Sierra Leone, yeah, we're not really interested in having too many of you come here right now, but if you're interested in having our medical support, we can send medical professionals there. And the medical professionals, once they're done working on that, then they go through a period of quarantine for, let's say, 20 days or 23 days when they're monitored to make sure that they're safe to come back and not bring Ebola to the homeland in greater numbers than before. And I also don't think, I disagree with Frieden, it's not about 0%. If the idea is we need to get the Ebola, the potential for Ebola to show up at all to 0%, well, that's just absurd. But why not make it smaller than what it is right now, given the openness that we have and the procedures that we have in place regarding who comes in and who goes out?
Yes, well, and he also said they do have a way of doing it already, but people don't think it's acceptable. But he said we're doing very good temperature screening. That is where it's going to be the most efficient. That is where they have a few hundred people leaving. We're using appropriate devices, trained staff checking every person who is leaving each of the 3 countries to see if they have a fever. If you screen people there, instead of a few hundred, it would be a few 100,000. It would be inaccurate. And this is the way we think we're going to be the most effective in keeping people who are having a fever from getting on planes. Mm-hmm. So they have a way of it. I think I would agree with your statement about it, Jeremiah. If we're willing to throw the boat at it in terms of financial money, because the question's half-assery. If we half-ass close the border and we half-ass send help, then we're going to get a half-ass of everything, and Ebola will be everywhere.
Could we not give more than half-ass and do more than half-ass about containment? For example, let me say this. There's a really vague kind of right of return, and this was put by Andrea Castillo, a Washington, D.C. resident. She said that Frieden steps on shaky ground when his first 2 contentions invoke, 1, a vague right of return for touring foreigners that immediately trumps domestic health, and 2, an insulting feigned ignorance of the possibility for aid worker exceptions. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it wouldn't be half-assed to say we are going to have policies regarding non-critical travel, right, that limits non-critical travel from Ebola-stricken countries. And that's, once again, Andrea Castillo. I like how she phrased that. That we could address that issue of non-critical travel, and that would still allow for exceptions for aid workers. And I don't think that that's half-assed. I think that would be a strategic decision, or at least is open to it being a strategic decision.
I think denying someone who has a unique strain of Ebola from coming back to America to go to some place like the Mayo Clinic to be tested instead of any nation in Liberia would be an ignorant way to solve it or to deal with it.
But would they even go to the Mayo Clinic?
It depends on where they would go in America, but the definite answer would be that in Liberia there is no such place that would be able to deal with the most volatile strains of Ebola. And so it's going to have to be somebody else. I'm not saying we take the worst people over here every time, but if we start developing a vaccine and we need to test it out, I don't know if we're going to get the right results by sending it over and doing it over in Liberia in not as controlled conditions.
Sure. You know, there's Rod Dreher at the American Conservative. He was talking about infrastructure. And this is something you and I have talked about before. And yes. I'll throw it out there and let people kind of gnaw on this. He's quoting a nurse who wrote a kind of interesting piece, actually, and the nurse says this: so let's look at the infrastructure. There are, in fact, a total of 4 medical isolation units in the entire United States, as we noted yesterday, that are capable of handling infected Ebola patients near endlessly. He asks, where are they and what can they handle? And these are the 4. Emory University's Serious Communicable Disease Unit is in Atlanta, Georgia. Okay, that's where Brantley and was it Wright Bowl, where they were treated. It has 3 beds. St. Patrick's Hospital ICU Isolation Unit in Missoula has 3 beds. The National Institute of Health's Special Clinic Studies Unit in Bethesda has 7 beds. And the biggest one is the Nebraska Medical Center Biocontaminant Unit in Omaha, Nebraska, has 10. So 3 plus 3 plus 7 plus 10 is 23 beds coast to coast. Right? That's what we ultimately have, which leads to the question, and this was a good question that I think Rod Dreher brought up, was, you know, the 360 or 316 million person question is, what happens when we have 24? Mm-hmm. You know, where are we going to go? And people can say things like, well, we'll put them in ICU units or ER units or whatever. The problem is those units are used for, in many places, hundreds of thousands of people. Yes, I think people don't understand how well the CDC can get at not letting it break out. I really don't. I think we're ignorant to it. It's like saying I know more than a doctor. Even though I have a broken leg, I've seen it said on TV before. So, I mean, no matter what he says, I don't have to believe him, but he does have trained experience in what he's doing, more than I do. And I mean, is that an appeal to authority? Sure.
But this is from it's the government blog, but it's the CDC's direct blog. This is from Health Protection. I don't know who. This is from Friedman, but just to give an example. Clinicians on the front lines have been key for the safety, identifying patients with both a history of travel and symptoms indicating they might have Ebola, immediately isolating them, consulting their local or state health departments, and getting the patients tested as needed. Indeed, since the outbreak began in Africa, CDC has been consulted with the state and local health departments on almost 100 cases in which travelers had recently returned from West Africa and shown symptoms that might have been caused by Ebola. Of those cases, 14 were considered to be truly at risk. Specimens from 13 were tested, and Ebola was ruled out in all 13 cases. But now CDC labs have confirmed our nation's first U.S. diagnosed patient. But basically what he's saying is, is it deadly enough in our first world nation to be closing down the borders? Is the percentage chance of an epidemic high enough to close down our borders, which would be a reduction in massive amounts of money in GDP for our country, to not allow people in and out, even if it's just from West Africa? And could people from West Africa that are wealthy pay for a ticket or travel to another country that we allow them to fly off of and fly into the United States anyways? Or to Canada or somewhere near us would be the question.
I think that the entire discussion, I think that it suffers because of the idea that close down the borders, right? That's a big thing. That's like an absolute thing. You get on a line, wherever the line is, and you guard it, or you build a fence that's going to stop Ebola that's happening right now. And I think that's one thing. But saying, okay, you can't do the whole thing, that would be absurd. It's kind of like getting down to zero. Is kind of an absurd task. But why does it have to be all or nothing? Why can't it be strategic?
But we're talking about I'm saying closing down to specifically West Africa alone is not a good idea. I'm not talking about closing down Canada's borders and Mexico.
No, and you're saying a complete, and I would agree. If it's a complete shutdown, I would agree. If it makes an exception for aid workers, I would be more open to that idea. And I want to say this. In 2013, okay, and I'm quoting from an article here. In 2013, scientists at MIT published research suggesting, quote, that even moderate measures of mobility restriction would be effective in controlling contagion in densely populated areas with highly interconnected road and transit networks.
And that's what we're doing already by doing temperature gauging and blood tests to people in Liberia who choose to leave.
But they're talking about moderate measures of mobility restriction. Well, yeah, okay.
Well, that is moderate measure of mobility restriction.
And I think that's what needs to be argued. That's my point. And the same thing is from the same article, CDC research in calmer times notes that, quote, throughout recorded history, travel has been a major factor in the spread of disease. And the CDC called for an enhanced, quote, border interventions, end quote, to control outbreaks. So that it's not even foreign to what the CDC has said before. It's not foreign to what scientists said just last year at MIT. And I'm saying all that only to say this, because as I said, I don't have a hard line in the sand. I don't think anybody really should right now. I think that we're all pretty ignorant about Ebola, right? And like, not ignorant about Ebola. We know an awful lot about Ebola. At the same time, the political ramifications of this, because this is political. Right, it really is. When you talk about people walking around with a disease, people don't typically like that. But I think that what needs to be stressed is that there is a reasonable place here for disagreement and for saying I don't fully agree with what the CDC is saying politically about how to deal with this politically. Or I don't fully agree with what the White House is saying, or I don't fully agree with what Fox News is saying, or I don't agree with what Alex Jones, and saying we need to be a little calmer here in our thought process, right? Get away from the breaking news, right? Scary images and stuff. Turn it off, and let's talk about this in a serious, calm, rational way, and try to figure out if there are sacrifices, and it would be a sacrifices that we would have to make, even possibly regarding GDP, right, in order to assure that we wouldn't have that kind of a thing and we can keep on the long haul, a long vision of what we want America to be, not just right now, today, but next year and years after that.
Well, and I think, too, that it's like what we were saying. The CDC was saying moderate levels of control are needed, and I think by doing temperature gauging and blood testing in Liberia before you can go out, which is what they do right now. I mean, it's not like right now they're saying, oh, you want to go to America? Here's a ticket. You know, they've been doing the clinicians and professionals that we've sent there in the first world countries, majority of their job is to make sure anyone coming back to first world nations or leaving the country is cleared. That is almost the essential role of what we're going to be doing there. Yeah. And then secondarily would be to try to control it in the area, that's the case. It's number one, to stop the outbreak from continuing, and number two is to isolate it. And so I think that it's a question of what people think the CDC is already doing or not. If they think they are doing nothing, or if they think they actually have protocol for what to do with someone who's choosing to go to another country. And yeah, and I agree with you. People need to take a step back from it and take a breath and look at it. Do we have to think that the CDC is absolutely right on everything? Oh no, I don't think they are. You know, and I don't think that, like you said, everybody has a version of truth. But I'll take my version of truth with the people that study diseases more than I will with the people that just think they know how to stop it.
You know, it's hard too, I guess. It's probably the conservative within me screaming out, right? The suppressed conservative. But remembering back on things like Katrina or like FEMA, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, these are real things, and how there's a great deal of reasonable suspicion regarding government entities and their assurances and how good they are at doing it. And you said something earlier about the appeal to authority, and I think that, and now it's okay in some cases. I mean, if an authority is a valid authority and they're competent and what they're saying, then fine. But I think it has more to do with the mistakes. I think rather than how well we know something, like for example, the woman that went on the cruise ship. It's things like that, because you can know all the things in the world, and you can say, well, we have this, we would be able to deal with this, or this is how we would handle this situation if this happened. And then small things like that, hopping on a ship and cruising around for a while and having Ebola on the boat. Yeah. You know, or flying on a plane and going to a different state. Like those are mistakes. Those are things that the CDC has learned from, but at the same time, what it's demonstrated is that mistakes are bound to happen. And the question is, what can happen in light of a mistake?
I agree with that. I would say, by that logic, I wouldn't give the government more authority by letting them have more control over the situation and closing it down if we know that they're not capable of it.
Right.
So that's why I don't think they would be able to functionally close down a border even if they attempted to. It would be a waste of resources.
Which that applies to that argument in response to conservatives, is to say, listen, if you criticize the government, it's an awfully strange thing that all of a sudden you think that this government project is going to work.
Is going to work.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. Right. That's the libertarian in me that says I don't know if I trust them enough to let them have the authority to close down the border.
Right. I'm with you. Okay, very well, dude. This was a lot of fun today.